So we have 7 requests to speak. The first 2 will be virtual presentations. So we can start with the video from Dr. Robert Steinbrook, Health Research Group Director of Public Citizen.
I am Robert Steinbrook, Director of Public Citizen's Health Research Group. We have no financial conflicts of interest. Public Citizen welcomes the FDA's comprehensive consideration of generative artificial intelligence-enabled devices. Public Citizen urges that disclosure and transparency to patients and healthcare professionals be required when GenAI is used in healthcare settings. We also urge that databases used for training such devices reflect the patient population that they are intended to serve to prevent discrimination and reduce bias. For the protection of consumers and patients, enhanced scrutiny of health-related GenAI devices is essential. We are particularly concerned about the influences of big money and greed in our healthcare system. When companies cut corners in rapidly developing and implementing GenAI devices, patients are at risk for harm. My comments address 2 topics. First, the need for additional regulatory oversight that is specific to GenAI-enabled devices to provide reasonable assurance of their safety and effectiveness, including new requirements for post-market monitoring of device safety and performance. And second, the critical importance of detailed and transparent information for the individuals and medical professionals who use GenAI-enabled devices. Special scrutiny for GenAI-enabled devices, including consumer health-related tools and applications, requires either presumptively designated these devices as Class 3 devices requiring pre-market FDA approval for safety and efficacy, including compliance with the Department of Health and Human Services standards for trustworthy artificial intelligence, or the establishment of a new and more stringent pre-market approval system for such devices that are not designated as Class 3. In the executive summary for this meeting, the FDA states that it, quote, may require special controls unique to GenAI-enabled devices when needed to provide reasonable assurance of the safety and effectiveness of the device, close quote, including certain Class 2 devices. We urge the agency to require such controls, and the requirements include robust post-market monitoring of device safety and performance, notification requirements to the users of GenAI-enabled devices if the device safety and performance is not as intended, and procedures to promptly remove devices with newly recognized safety and performance concerns from the market. The FDA should establish appropriate thresholds for suspending companies found to have repeatedly violated its rules and requirements and referring wrongdoing to the Department of Justice for legal action. Companies found to have knowingly concealed harms or substantial potential harms should face criminal prosecution for the company as well as top-level responsible corporate officers. The FDA has made constructive suggestions for the provision of transparent information about GenAI-enabled devices. For individuals, the critical point is that the GenAI-enabled device must not be a proprietary black box. To the maximum extent possible, such devices should be explained in easy-to-understand terms about their design, their autonomy, and the extent of autonomy. Complete information should be provided about the safety features to prevent hallucinations and other potentially dangerous, erroneous, or false content, the anticipated frequency of such hallucinations or false content, how people interact with the device, and the safety and other controls that the user may have. Although GenAI-enabled devices have promised to improve health, their risks are not fully known. There is justified concern that without robust oversight, that is, oversight that is more stringent and demanding than current requirements, the risks of harms will substantially increase. We urge the FDA to move forward with strong and comprehensive regulatory requirements for GenAI-enabled devices. I thank Egan Kemp at Public Citizen for his help in preparing these comments. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
One that I'll just make some quick comments on. The first is really around governance, which I think speaks directly to
Wonderful. Next, we have a video from Frederick Chen from the American Medical Association.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Frederick Chen, Chief Health and Science Officer at the American Medical Association. I appreciate the opportunity to provide public comment on the vital topic of augmented intelligence in healthcare. I'd like to offer the perspectives of practicing physicians like family doctors, dermatologists, and gastroenterologists who work in a variety of settings from rural to urban. These physicians may not be early adopters, but they see AI's potential and deserve to have their needs and concerns represented. AI has transformative potential in medicine, from enhancing diagnostic precision to easing administrative workflows. Yet, with this promise comes a set of crucial challenges. In December 2023, the AMA surveyed over 1,000 physicians in different specialties to assess their views on AI. While 38% reported using some form of AI in their practice, about 2/3 remained cautious. Major concerns include data privacy, liability for AI errors, and potential impacts on the doctor-patient relationship. Today, I'm going to discuss 4 areas essential to the responsible integration of AI in healthcare: transparency, clinical validation, integration of AI into clinical workflows, and the importance of data privacy and security. First, transparency is foundational to the ethical use of AI in healthcare. Physicians and patients alike need to understand when AI is part of a care process, especially for decisions that impact diagnosis or treatment plans. For transparency to be meaningful, AI developers have to share detailed information about how models are trained, what data sources are used, and any known limitations or biases. For example, a diagnostic AI tool might be accurate in a controlled setting, but it'll work really differently in a community hospital with a diverse patient population. While we were pleased to see FDA's release of guiding principles on transparency, the AMA is disappointed that we have not yet seen transparency mandates for AI-enabled medical devices and other healthcare AI. We strongly encourage FDA to consider what it can do, including updating labeling guidelines to further the necessary transparency for AI-enabled medical devices. Second, robust validation of AI systems is essential to ensuring patient safety and clinical efficacy. AI models must undergo continuous testing and refinement to ensure that they are accurate, unbiased, and effective across a diverse range of patient populations and settings. As we know, models are often built on data that underrepresent certain populations, leading to potential inaccuracies that could harm those who are most vulnerable. We encourage the FDA to adopt rigorous and ongoing validation requirements to ensure that AI tools perform safely and equitably, especially in real-world healthcare environments. The AMA strongly supports a risk-based approach to AI validation, where higher-risk tools, like those involved in diagnostics or treatment, undergo more stringent testing than lower-risk administrative tools. Additionally, the continued value of AI-enabled medical devices will depend largely on their safety and performance in the real world. Significant attention should be paid towards building post-marketing surveillance systems tailored to AI-enabled medical devices. Third, AI should augment rather than replace clinical judgment and include safeguards that allow for physician autonomy. While AI offers significant decision support capabilities, physicians must remain central in interpreting AI recommendations, especially when the stakes for patient outcomes are high. The AMA believes that human oversight is essential to prevent over-reliance on AI and to safeguard patient safety. For AI to genuinely support healthcare teams, it must fit within existing workflows in a way that enhances rather than disrupts the care process. AI tools should be designed with input from practicing clinicians to ensure that they align with real-world workflows and address the actual needs within the healthcare environment. Finally, data privacy and security are paramount as we expand the use of AI in healthcare. AI models rely on vast amounts of data to function effectively, which means that patient data privacy must be safeguarded. AI tools can also be tempting targets for cyber attacks. Healthcare data, often sensitive and personal, require strict protections to ensure that patient information is not misused, re-identified, or otherwise compromised. Patients and physicians should have rights to know how their data are used and even to opt out if they have concerns about privacy. As large language models and other generative AI systems continue to develop, there's a risk that patient data might be inadvertently included in broader data sets. The AMA envisions a future where AI serves as a valuable tool that enhances healthcare delivery without compromising patient safety, data integrity, or physician autonomy. The AMA stands ready to work with the FDA to develop policies that ensure AI in healthcare is deployed responsibly with a steadfast commitment to patient safety, clinical efficacy, and equity. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to continued collaboration on this critical issue.
Thank you to both of our videoed speakers. Next, we will have two speakers who have 5 minutes each from Deloitte Consulting. We will start with Dr. Sandhya Polu and then Dr. Anil Bhatta. Dr. Polu. Oh, okay.
Good morning. We want to thank the advisory committee and the FDA for this opportunity to discuss some of the considerations around the use of safe and effective use of generative AI in medical devices.
But I think the right answers are not completely determined yet in those areas.
Go to the next slide.
Just one more point on this risk model that we have. So underneath those 7 domains are actually 43 individual
Is this
questions.
the right arrow?
Risk register. So those questions each map.
And the title of our presentation today is Addressing the Multi-Use Nature of Generative AI in Medical Devices. So my name is Anil Bhatta. I'm a manager at Deloitte Consulting. I have a background in pharmacology, so I'm a pharmacologist by training, and I'm a biomedical data scientist by passion. And I've been working with FDA on a variety of different regulatory science projects, as well as using AI and generative AI to make the regulatory review process more efficient. So today, we want to talk about some of the unique challenges to generative AI, and then how you go about addressing some of these challenges. So generative AI has a lot of potential, and it can be transformative in healthcare setting. However, because of the very dynamic and complex nature of generative AI models, there are various different challenges that we need to consider from a monitoring perspective, especially in a post-marketing setting. And a lot of challenges with traditional AI also apply to generative AI. However, there are several other challenges that are truly unique to generative AI. And therefore, there's a need for a new framework in terms of addressing those challenges. So here we have outlined 5 unique challenges with generative AI, and then how you go about addressing those. So the first one is it centers around just the variability in unlimited output from a generative AI model. And because of this variability in the output, it becomes very challenging when you think through quality of those outcomes, right? Unlike traditional AI, where it's a definitive outcome, generative AI has variability in its outcome, therefore makes it very challenging from a quality perspective. And it's very paramount in a medical context where the accuracy and reliability of those outcomes are paramount. There's also a challenge in terms of defining what an error is for generative AI. So for a lot of generative AI models, unlike traditional AI where you're measuring the output of your model against a defined, clear truth, for generative AI, the outputs aren't so straightforward, right? So therefore, it's really hard to define exactly what error is. And because of those difficulties in defining error, it trickles down into, from a model evaluation perspective, how do you develop metrics that can truly measure the performance of these generative AI models in these medical devices. So unlike traditional AI, where you can rely on some of the traditional metrics like accuracies and recall and precision, even F1 scores, generative AI models, there are a lot of nuances where some of these metrics may not apply. So there's this need for a new metric framework to evaluate these models. And then there's also uncertainties around unlimited amount of input that can feed into a generative AI, which can result in unlimited amount of output. So therefore, there's complexity in monitoring that as well. And then lastly, it centers around resources that are needed to monitor these generative AI-based models in a medical devices in a post-marketing setting, where there's a significant need of computational power for you from a monitoring perspective, right? Because a lot of these models are based on large language models with billions of parameters, which requires significant computational resources for monitoring. And subsequently, there is also significant need of human oversight because this model, because of a lack of standard model metrics, you're having to rely on a lot of human in the loop to validate these models. So because of these truly unique and novel challenges with generative AI, there are several risks that we want to present to you today. These risks we've bucketed for today's presentation into three main categories. So the first category is centers around misinterpretation, and misinterpretation has several different layers. So there is a misinterpretation at the model level. So if you're injecting a prompt into a medical device, how it interacts with the underlying data in order for it to generate a response to your prompt. So there's interpretation of the data at the model level. And then there's also interpretation, especially when we're talking about GenAI-enabled medical devices that are deployed in a non-clinical setting. So these are devices that patients take with them at home. How do they interpret the results of those generative AI devices? The second risk category we want to discuss today is jailbreaking. So this really centers around prompt injection or other types of malicious attacks to the generative AI systems. Therefore, generating output that are outside of its intended use, right? And it's really important when it comes to medical devices, where we really want to make sure that we safeguard the use of generative AI, almost like a narrow use generative AI in those contexts. And then lastly, there is biases and over-reliances. And just like misinterpretation, biases, there are different sort of like stakeholder in that ecosystem that you need to think about, biases from a physician's or caregiver's perspective, how they interpret the outcome of the generative AI model. From a patient perspective, how do they interpret the outcome of those outputs? And then, potential for, misdiagnosis and potentially, self-treatment. And then also there is the over-reliance issues, and this is especially for physicians and other clinicians, where they might tend to over-rely on the outcome of the generative AI and not thinking through their own clinical judgment, right? So these are the risks and some of the challenges that we discussed, and I'm going to turn it to my colleague Sandy to talk about some of the approaches that we have thought about for addressing these challenges and risks. So over to you, Sandy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandy Polu, and I'd like to focus a little bit on how we address some of the many challenges that were discussed yesterday and that Anil just presented. At Deloitte, we have a trustworthy AI framework with several dimensions that we use to support trustworthy AI outputs. It's similar to some of the frameworks across federal agencies, including HHS. And today I'd like to focus on 5 dimensions of that framework. The first one is safe and secure, and how do we ensure that Gen AI models produce safe and secure outputs? We can think about that from 2 different perspectives. One is a user perspective, one is a system perspective. So from the user perspective, how do we ensure that user prompts, user inputs return useful, relevant, appropriate information? We can use prompt shields to constrain user prompts so that they are returning information that is appropriate to the context of use. We can also validate that user inputs are appropriate. For example, for patient-facing devices, that if, let's say, it's a continuous glucose monitor, they're not asking about some respiratory problem, for example. From the system perspective, Anil mentioned the risk of malicious attacks, prompt injections, which turn seemingly benign prompts into prompts that could return harmful, misleading, false information. There are several methods to address prompt injection attacks. One is validating user inputs, for example, constraining the input length, sanitizing outputs to filter out any sensitive information, also building in safeguards to direct system prompts so that they only return information that is relevant to the context of use. The second dimension is robust and reliable. This really is about ensuring that responses are contextually appropriate. Again, we can use system prompt engineering to support relevant and appropriate outputs. There are several techniques to minimize hallucinations as well, including domain-specific fine-tuning. The third dimension is privacy, and here we really look from the patient perspective to focus on prompt safety so that sensitive PHI data is treated appropriately. We also want to create patient awareness, particularly for patient-facing devices, so that they are aware of how their data may or may not be used. The fourth dimension is transparent and explainable. Traceback, traceability to the source outputs are really important to ensure that transparency. Also, although we think about explainability in AI in terms of explaining the outputs developed by algorithms, we would like to propose thinking about explainability in terms of outputs that the patient may see. We can take inspiration from the proposed patient medication information rule, which would stipulate that patient medication information is an 8th grade reading level, for example. And the last dimension we'd like to talk about today is fair and impartial, and really how do we manage bias in terms of GenAI. It's obviously not unique to GenAI, but the quantity of data sources is orders of magnitude greater. And we can address potential bias in AI throughout the GenAI lifecycle, from design and model development to deployment. Some of the techniques that are available are validating appropriate representation in the training data sets, using synthetic data to do bias training data sets. We can also validate that the training data set has the appropriate representation, pre-process training data to filter out any biased language, and there are several other techniques available as well that are in development and research. And lastly, we just want to emphasize the importance of human-centered design throughout the device product lifecycle and throughout the GenAI lifecycle, and ensuring that humans are always part of that process. Thank you, and we'll take any questions you have.
Great, thank you so much. We'll move on to the next speaker. We'll do questions at the end. Dr. Shrestha from Partner Analytics. You have 5 minutes.
Hello, good morning. Yes, my name is Yujan Shrestha. It's very nice to be here. So I'm affiliated with my company called Analytics. They have paid for my hotel and flight. And I also owe my wife precisely 15 diaper changes as well. So I want to also disclose that conflict of interest there. So at my company, Analytics, we're a software development agency, and we also help our clients both build their software medical devices and AI as medical devices and get them cleared through FDA. And so today I would like to discuss a potential example of how I think we can turn post-market surveillance from a stick into a carrot, where a stick is something that manufacturers don't want to do and a carrot is something that they would want to do. This is just one example, but I want to also kind of explore how this can be done in more generally as well. So, lots of my role as a consultant is to help my clients allocate their resources. They have a certain set of key marketing claims that they want to achieve, and they have a finite budget and timeline. Well, if you know someone that doesn't have a finite budget and timeline, please send them by my way. I'll be sure to help them out. And so everyone wants the same thing. Patients, FDA, industry, we all want the same thing. We want safe and effective medical devices quickly and with a low price point. However, in the real world, trade-offs must be made because of budget and timeline constraints. And these trade-offs, unfortunately, mostly are made in the pre-market, with the pre-market clearance as that main focus. That's what most smaller stage startups, earlier stage startups are just trying to get to pre-market clearance, and you can understand that they don't really care most about the post-market at that time. And unfortunately, in the post-market, this becomes a type of regulatory debt. And if you don't mind me using a software analogy, it's kind of like technical debt, where new features always take precedence over fixing old debt. And I believe the same thing happens to post-market analysis there. So I believe that is one of the fundamental reasons why we only have 4% uptake in radiology, as was discussed yesterday. And also, we have the issues of data drift and also lack of data generalization as well, because of the lack of post-market feedback. So let's change the narrative and turn it into a win-win situation for everybody. You know, why not turn post-market evaluation into something that could be pitched to decrease pre-market burden? And to do so while also decreasing cost, time to market, reduce regional biases, mitigate data drift, and also mitigate model drift in the multi-layer model application design. So here I'd like to present a hypothetical device, and I promise I'm not getting free advice from you guys. This is purely hypothetical for now. This is an example of a device that has a open-ended input and a closed-ended output. It uses LLMs of unknown provenance, and what it does is it takes DICOM header files and it tags them with certain key Boolean classifiers for downstream things like hanging protocols and other standardization. So here's an example of a synthetic data generation pipeline that uses site-specific data. It uses what I'm calling a frontier model, and I'm defining a frontier model as a foundation model that is on the cutting edge. And that frontier model uses a specific test generation prompt or test data generation prompt that then creates synthetic data. And then through some testing mechanisms that we talked about more yesterday by people smarter than me, we can verify this very focused intended use of this model. So it's kind of like soup validation, where the soup could do lots of things, but you only care about the things that you need that soup to do for your device. So it's a similar concept here. Also want to describe the concept of also doing validation for one more intended use, and that is to serve as a proxy for a ground truther for this very narrow task. And if we combine the two together, we have site-specific data, fully automated data synthetic generation, and we can even have a fully automated data ground truthing, and also a nightly comparison to the device outputs. And you can imagine here, this operates nightly. Because it operates nightly, it can detect data drift as it occurs. Also, the foundation models could be swapped out, so that can capture data drift in a more global level as well. And just to conclude here, sorry about going a little bit over. So I just want to say that I believe approaches like this would get the 90-10 trade-off balance just right, where we are giving something to the manufacturers that they can do in the pre-market that would also help them in the post-market as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll have Raga Gunakam from Doctors for America. You'll have 5 minutes. Okay, we'll come back to them. Dr. Keith Dreyer, Chief Data Science Officer, Mass General Brigham. Dr. Dreyer, you have 10 minutes.
Pardon me?
10 minutes.
Oh, I'll take it. Thank you. Hello, everybody, again. Good morning. I want to thank the FDA for the creation of this AdCom. It's truly been needed. I would just suggest that you're stepping into a movie that's been playing for 7 years. The questions that you're asking about, say, specifically monitoring, are questions we've been asking for 7 years. I do know there are subtle nuances and additions and differences with regard to GenAI, foundation models, new technology. But as I said and listened to all day yesterday, it's just a reminder of the last 10 years of what radiology has been trying to answer and deal with and petition and talk about and address. So I would just suggest, as the previous speaker said, there's technical debt here. What you are trying to resolve here with these discussions are not just the future. It's 1,000 devices that exist today. There is no monitoring to these devices, and that's just not right. So the notion of trying to solve this problem going forward, hopefully you'll be thinking of also solving the problem that already exists today. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I completely agree with what Rob Califf said, and that is this notion of we are holding the bag as providers of care. And so when it comes to monitoring and these type of things, this is now our responsibility because it's nobody else's. And that's kind of this broken cycle that I talked about. And it doesn't matter to me if it's on the left side or the right side. It's still the broken cycle of trying to capture and record this information that's necessary to determine if these devices are working for our patients. If you think about the ways to be able to monitor, it doesn't really matter before or after. It all kind of looks the same if you just step back a couple thousand feet. So there's software testing when you've got a device, and as soon as you can get the bugs out and you can throw some data into it, then you do performance testing. Typically, as was discussed yesterday, this was benchmarking and other different ways to solve this problem. But suffice it to say, you have to have some sort of answers or ground truth if you're going to test software that actually generates answers from data. So you have to have the A inside and then the outside to be able to test that. So that's test data, and that's, in my mind, standalone performance testing as it's defined by FDA today. Then there's other mechanisms, and the one that I talked about yesterday that I'm not a big fan of is comparative effectiveness. But what I think is important is the concept of having subject matter experts to be able to test that data to determine its accuracy. Whether you do that with LLMs on top of LLMs as models acting as humans, or you have actual humans doing it. The problem with doing this in a pre-market way, you're doing it in an incredibly artificial way. So the issue I have with comparative effectiveness and thinking of it as a drug, but it's not, it's a device, barely, it's really software, is this notion of now trying to A/B test with and without devices and putting people in artificial situations to then test those devices and look at their performance. It typically just doesn't work very well, and it's incredibly expensive, and it doesn't get you much further than just the benchmarking before you deploy a product. And so if you think that something has got a higher risk and you impose comparative effectiveness, you're just slowing down the process of that product getting out. You're not really mitigating risk in my mind. As this product deploys to the site, now you've got deployment. So the same product now is being dropped into a facility, and that's where things start to change. So all of this done before here, I know I'm reiterating this, is the notion of pre-market testing. And now we have new data for the first time that's never been seen by this algorithm before, the product, and you have new subject matter experts that have never been seen by the product before. And that's at multiple sites with multiple manufacturers. And that's the world that we exist today, times hundreds and hundreds of algorithms at hundreds and hundreds of facilities. So the challenge I see with pre-market testing is what we're saying is we're going to do a standalone performance test. If you hit some bar of threshold, let's call it 80% for sensitivity specificity, then I'm going to expect that this is going to work at all sites that it's deployed at. And the problem is it doesn't. So if my site is functioning at an adequate number, do I really care that the algorithm is not working at other facilities? I really care about my facility. And if you do standalone performance test and convert that into a comparative effectiveness test, you really haven't moved the bar at these facilities where that solution is not working. And I'm still working, but I was working before with a solution that was easier to get into the market. So what I would propose is that standalone performance test is fine, but what's not fine is the inability to determine if that solution is going to work at these various facilities. So on top of a performance test, this is, Matt, what I was talking about yesterday, the notion of a clinical validation or a site validation. This happens today. Nobody deploys AI and expects it to work, no matter whether it's FDA cleared or not, whether it has had a performance test, whether it's had a reader study, without doing clinical validation, because there's just no way to guarantee that it will work. You'll find out, sadly, months later after you have a problem. And, you know, I've gotten pushback from FDA before explaining this, and they say, well, there's been no device recalls. It's because this stuff is, quite frankly, not important enough to be able to do a device recall. So typically when it doesn't work for us, we just throw it to the side and treat it as if it's not going to give us the answers that we want, and eventually gets eliminated. But there are major problems that are happening today because there isn't this concept of clinical validation. So what does that mean? That means that you're basically removing that concept where you've got test subjects and test data in a pseudo-artificial environment and putting a real environment now with real facility data, real subject matter experts that have to make the determination of whether this is useful or not, and do that clinical validation, ideally before you deploy. And because the product, in theory, will change through change controls and other mechanisms, and those happen today, that facility data continuously changes. And the one thing that I would try and stress, I touched on briefly yesterday, these devices don't act directly on patients. Oftentimes, they act on data coming out of devices that act on patients. So, for example, Many of these are working off of image data coming from MR, CT, PET scanners, X-rays, et cetera. And those devices in our facilities are changing all the time. The output of that data is changing all the time. The protocols on those devices are changing. The resolution of those devices are changing. None of that gets tested again. So we now are responsible for testing all of that data continuously and comparing that product to that data and making sure that it comports to the accuracy that we require. So that continuously happens today. And it's only going to get worse through GenAI because it's going to do more and it's going to be stronger. Also, the subject matter experts change. The opinions and thoughts and different ways to determine is there a aneurysm because the size changes by just metrics changing. So there's all of this change that goes on, and that's this notion of the requirement for monitoring. It's really basically, in my mind, clinical validation that it either happens episodically or continuously, but it happens after deployment. And in my mind, the risk of the product should determine the content and the frequency of that monitoring that's required. And that is post-market testing. Now, this is this test harness that I talked about, this healthcare arena that us and others have looked at as a solution for all of these stages that we're required for if we're building product to deploy at our facilities or if we're buying and deploying product to be deployed at our facilities. And whether the manufacturer provides it or not doesn't really matter to us. We have to do it. And so in this particular case, I'll go back to this draft reporting solution, and that is this notion of saying, how do we monitor that component that is a medical device piece? And we do that by monitoring the difference between the draft and the final report, what it puts out and what got corrected. And so that's as simple as taking that solution that is the draft report creator, let the expert make the correction and create the final report, and take the difference between the draft report and the final report, and use that as the comparison. Put that into the registry that was talked about yesterday at the American College of Radiology, make that available to the site, and make that available to the manufacturer, and also potentially use that to improve the product as well. This is integrated into the ACR's registry, which is a national solution. And I would argue that there aren't a lot of monitoring solutions that exist today, but if the FDA said these are the requirements of manufacturers to be able to do this, then I think you'll see industry start to grow solutions because many people have created these solutions, but there just isn't a lot of uptake. So I think if there were a requirement for manufacturers to be able to do this, then I think you'll see that the industry at large, the public, will start to create solutions, which is already happening, as I say. So the monitoring, the difference between the draft and the final report is what can make this product a solid and continuously solid solution, which maintains and improves its accuracy. And that is the solution. So the notion in my mind, as I'll say, I just iterate for the final time, the notion of comparative effectiveness should give way to this much more solid solution, not just for generative AI, but for all AI that we're using with the notion of clinical validation and monitoring. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll ask once more, Raga Kanakam from Doctors for America, are you here? Okay, we'll move on to Carrie Herstein, CTA.
Good morning, and thank you to the FDA and the panel for the opportunity for CTA to be here and present a little bit about the work we have underway on health AI and standard solutions. Just in case you don't know who we are, the obligatory corporate slide, CTA, the Consumer Technology Association, our mission is to help innovators of all sizes grow. We have about 1,300 plus member companies, and really important to highlight that 80 to 85% of them represent small to medium-sized businesses. Very important when we're looking at innovation, particularly around generative AI and health AI. We have a lot of internal resources, including market research, divisions and working groups, and where I spend my time in our ANSI-accredited standards development department. We're also likely most well known for our trade show, CES, which is the most influential technology trade show in the world. We are really excited to be back in Las Vegas, January 7th through the 10th. We'll have a great digital health summit with a lot of highlights on AI and GenAI. Two specific panels pointed out here, again, looking at health AI startups as well as health AI in 2020. I think that's actually supposed to be 2032, so apologies for the typo. But we hope that you're able to join us there and learn more about these innovative solutions. Inside of CTA, we have our CTA Health Division, which strives to increase the use of technology-enabled value-based healthcare to reduce healthcare costs and drive better health outcomes. We have a significant set of diverse stakeholders, from consumer technology companies to med tech to health plans, and everybody in between. This group has been heavily focused in the last few years on all things AI and continue to help our association's mission and scope in this direction. And as I mentioned, we are an ANSI accredited standards developer. I like to say that there's probably not a piece of consumer technology in your home that isn't touched in some way, shape, or form by a CTA standard. We're very well known for things like closed captioning in airplane mode. If you flew here, you probably used our standard in that process. But we have 31 plus standards in the digital health space. And our AI standard specifically started in 2019. Because we are the Consumer Technology Association, we have focused on both AI horizontally, looking at AI across a variety of sectors, as well as AI and healthcare standards. I won't read all of those here for you today, but I would like to highlight one specifically, which is our most recently published one, which is CTA 2125. This document looks at best practices for information disclosure. And as I've been listening to the various conversations over the last day and a half, I'm really looking at ways that we can communicate to end users what's happening inside AI solutions is going to be very powerful from a standardization perspective. We also have recently taken a little bit of a step back and said, how can we focus on our intentionality in standards development to help address many of the questions in industry and that the panel here has been focusing on? And as a result, we recently formed a Health AI Planning Council, which is a multi-stakeholder group of health sector experts collaborating on a roadmap to identify where there's needs for specific standards in health AI. While we've been initially focused on predictive AI, we have started to start that parking lot list and figure out where there's going to be differentials and additional information needed for generative AI. But the goal of this council is to work with accredited standards developers like CTA to identify and develop standards that are measurable, practical, adaptable, and consensus-driven. We're really excited to get to work on this further in the beginning of next year. While that's been focused on predictive AI, we've had a lot of different industry activities looking at generative AI, one of them being looking at education. So we've developed a lot of education materials, such as our issue brief on reimbursement for health AI and innovative technologies. We've been tracking GenAI, as I mentioned, to identify where there might be additional gaps and areas for standardization. And we've been working with other health technology associations through our Health AI Collaborative Group to figure out what other education is needed, and have done some great briefs, including a What is Health AI document. A lot of that also continues to happen via events and bringing folks together. And we have a handful already scheduled into 2025 on the AI-powered health workforce, our health AI liability, and our third annual Health AI Plus conference. So at CTA, again, thank you for the time to address you all today, and we look forward to working with you on this important activity.
Thank you so much. Oh, one last call, Doctors for America, Raga Kanakam. All right, with that it concludes our morning speakers. I would like to thank all the open public hearing speakers for taking the time to address the panel today. As a quick summary, today we heard, actually we started with an echo of yesterday when Dr. Califf voiced a concern that AI outcomes are currently fiscal, and that was echoed in our first speech. We heard a suggestion that consumer health devices with generative AI are somehow regulated to ensure patient safety from our video speaker. There was an emphasis on notifications to users of the device and procedures to remove those devices from the market when there are complications, and a strong statement to have thresholds for companies which repeatedly violate safety standards when it comes to generative AI. The AMA shared their additional emphasis on 4 areas: transparency, validation, integration into workflow, and privacy and security, which we also covered yesterday. Specifically, they mentioned transparency mandates, potentially via labeling, continuous testing, and refinement of devices both in the pre- and post-market settings to ensure safe and equitable deployment. The AMA agreed with the panel's belief from yesterday that AI for administration may have less stringent monitoring than those that include diagnosis and treatment. They also emphasized the need at this stage for human in the loop. I can hear my computer science colleagues, so I just want to say we recognize that human in the loop actually refers to the development stage of these technologies originally. We also recognize that we have taken that and now moved it to the post-development setting where we're requiring humans to interact with the device. So we know we've changed that definition. I also bring it up because it's a challenging definition to change, because how do you regulate humans? And that has come up yesterday and again today.